In this bass lesson, you're going to learn 5 ways you can start writing real songs using nothing but the bass. Hi, I'm Luke from Become a Bassist, and if you ever wondered how bass players approach writing music, then sticking around. Not only is it entirely possible, it's a ton of fun as well. Today's lesson actually comes from an email subscriber named Steve, who emailed me and said, "Hey Luke, I love your YouTube lessons, mate. Very well explained. Something that I have struggled with for years is writing songs. I've been playing bass for 20 years, but writing songs on the bass I find difficult because I can't imagine how the rest of the song would go outside of the bass part. Writing on guitar or piano would be a lot easier because there are chords and melodies going on that make the song a lot more apparent. However, I can't play those instruments very well, and the songs I try to write on them are very uninspiring as I can't jump between chords easily. So my question is, what is a good approach for writing songs using the bass as my main instrument? What's a good approach for writing some riffs and melodies as a starting point for a song? This is such a good question. Now, truthfully, it probably is easier to write songs using a guitar or a piano. You'll notice that a lot of famous bass players who are also songwriters play one or both of those instruments in addition to bass. Think about people like Paul McCartney, Roger Waters, John Deacon, Sting. I'm sure there are plenty more, but they all primarily play bass, but they all play a secondary instrument which they most likely compose on as well. Guitar and piano, they're probably just a little bit more conducive to songwriting, but that doesn't at all mean you can't write songs using nothing but your bass. You absolutely can. So let's dive into these 5 methods. The first method is one that I like to use a lot, and that is to start not with a riff or a chord progression or anything like that, but to start with the melody of the song. For me, the melody is everything. The melody is the song. Now, a lot of instrumentalists, guitarists in particular, they'll come up with some really cool riffs and then different parts, and then they kind of slap a melody on top of that maybe, hopefully, fits with whatever else is going on. Now, this is definitely a legit way of doing things, but try reversing that. Start with the melody and get everything else to support that. So the next question is, where do you get these melodies from? Now, there are tons of options. You might kind of just be noodling on your bass, and you might play something that you like the sound of. So great, that could be the start of a melody. You might just be kind of idly humming in the shower or in the car, and you might just hum something that you actually like the sound of. This is actually how a lot of songs get written by a ton of great songwriters. They aren't always in a songwriting mode when their best ideas come out of them. These ideas you get either from kind of noodling around on your bass or just humming them idly. You can just hum them or play them and record them into your phone. Most phones have a perfectly great way of recording voice memos, and from there you've got them stored and you can play around with them. I must have hundreds of different little ideas I've recorded into my phone. Some of them I had my bass in my hands, so I played the ideas on my bass and played them into my phone. But most of them I was doing something completely unrelated, had the idea, and then just kind of sung it into my phone super easily. When you have this little melody though, what are you supposed to do with it? Well, a good start is to try putting some bass notes underneath it. Now I've got a little melody here that we can try it with. The melody goes like this. It goes that's it. Just a nice little pentatonic melody. So so let's try putting some different bass notes underneath it and see what sounds good. We can start by using the notes of the melody. We're in what key are we in? A flat minor, or potentially B major, however you want to think about it. So let's try using some of these notes. So that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. That's an option. What about starting on something other than that one there? So you might go. That's kind of cool. I don't like that D sharp there. No, I'm not into that. I like that better. Let's try something else. Ooh, that's interesting. Okay. Ah, that's cool. Notice how playful this is. I'm not kind of being too analytical or anything. If something works and I like the sound of it, all great. If not, it's fine too. Just move on to something else. There aren't any rules at this stage, but I do like that. That's cool. It's what? 1, 2, 1, 2. So it's like 2 chords per bar at this stage. I kind of like that idea. That's quite low for me. But that's cool. Let's work with that for a moment. Once you have some notes that you think will work well, you can actually start to build chords around them. And that might sound something like this. So low. So we've got B major, A major, G sharp minor, F sharp major. Same bass notes. The chords are now just a bit more filled out, and it actually feels like the skeleton of a song. Now, if you need help with some chords and how to play them, how to create them on your own bass, then check out my Bass Chord Pro mini course. It's a free resource that'll show you just about every chord you'd ever need on your bass. You can sign up for it here or in the first link of the description, and it's going to help out a lot with this kind of stuff. Now, this melody first method is great because everything you do is in service of the melody, which is what most people will be listening for anyway, so it makes sense. The next method for making your own songs is to start with the drum groove. It can be hard to just come up with something from kind of inside a vacuum where you don't have anything to work from. And using a drum groove to jumpstart the process is a great way of doing things. Now, if you kind of know some drummers' vocabulary, you can kind of imagine what a drummer might do and then play something to that. Or you can go one step further and find an actual drum loop and play along with it. Now, I've got one right here. I haven't listened to it yet, so let's just put it on and see what we can find. Okay, so it's like a 16th note slow funk thing. Okay, cool. Now, if you already have ideas, you can try and apply them to this new track. So if we use the other idea we just had from the first method, it might sound something like this. 2, 3, 4. Something like that. That'd work really, really well. Of course, you could also come at it completely fresh with no other ideas in mind. You could just pick a sound or even just a single note and play around. Let's try a B. Okay. Cool. Yeah, that might give you some ideas, something like that. And if of course you're doing something like this and you come up with something you think that could be worthy of its own song, make sure you either write it down or record it into your phone so you don't forget it. Something like that, yeah? Like I said, don't try and rely on your memory when it comes to this stuff because chances are it won't work that well. Now, I talk a little bit more about this kind of method in my video, How to Jam on Bass, because jamming is just kind of like spontaneous songwriting. So check out that video out if you want to go a little bit further into this method. Now, the third method is to use existing song types and song structures to base your songs around. One of the hard parts of songwriting is figuring out the structure, what should go where and when, and all that sort of stuff. But you can actually bypass this whole thing by using existing forms. Things like the blues. With the blues, you've already got a set chord progression and a form, at least for the most part. And the only thing you have to do is figure out the melody, and then if you want, you can put words to it. I actually used to teach a songwriting course at a university, and this was one of the things I usually did first. Everyone had to write a blues melody. It's relatively simple, usually just 3 lines, and you don't have to worry about chords or form. You can just let yourself be creative. And most of the time when I did this exercise, they ended up being super funny, mostly because at the university it was mostly 18-year-olds fresh out of high school. Most of the songs ended up being about drinking. Jokes aside though, this is a legit way to get started with low pressure and low stakes. And if you need help getting started with the blues form, check out my blues bass lines lesson up here. Did you also know that most pop songs, the kind of songs you hear on the radio, follow pretty much the same structure? It usually goes intro, verse, chorus, bridge, and then after the bridge it's usually either verses and choruses, or just choruses until the song finishes. Of course there's variations on that. For example, if there's a pre-chorus that gets chucked in there usually before every chorus, and potentially right after the bridge as well, but that's kind of the basic structure. Now if you find yourself with two ideas, either in the same key or a closely related key, you can try them out as verses and chorus ideas and see how they kind of fit in together. And that actually leads very nicely into our fourth method for writing songs, and that's to use your knowledge of chords and music theory. Now this is more of a kind of intellectual approach, but if you know your kind of theory, you'll know that every key has a family of chords and sounds that work well within it, and you'll also know there are tons of chord progressions that get used all the time. Some examples of super common chord progressions, you've got 1, 5, 6, 4, so let's use the key of C. Simple. So 1, 5, 6, 4 sounds like this. Yeah? 1, 5, 6, 4. Yeah? It's or you've also got its variant, 6, 4, 1, 5. Yeah, 6, 4, 1, 5. A minor, F major, C major, G major. Yeah? You've also got 1, 4, 5 and 1, 4, 5, 4. One, 4, 5. 1, 4, 5, 4 sounds like this. 4. Just like that. Super, super common. 1, 6, 2, 5 works really well too. 1, 6, 2, 5. 1, 6, 2, 5. Just like that. As well as 2, 5, 1, 6 works really well as well. In this case, D minor, G, C major, A minor, D minor, G major, C. Just like that. You could also combine the last method with this one and take a few of these common chord progressions and make your verses one of the progressions and make your choruses another. Now this might be a little bit formulaic, but you already know that it's going to sound really good because the progressions get used all the time and they always work. Of course, the more you get into the theory side of things, the more options of what you can use opens up. You can borrow different chords from different places and do all kinds of things with modal mixing, relative and parallel keys. That's a whole rabbit hole that we don't have to have time in this video to go through, but it is absolutely possible. Finally, the last method that we'll talk about is collaboration. That's right, you don't have to write absolutely everything by yourself. You can join forces with someone who maybe plays guitar or piano, and you can kind of bounce ideas off each other. You might bring a riff to the table, they might play some chords over it, or they might have this melody that'll sound really cool, and they can figure out some options for what to do with it and where you can take it, and then you can have this back and forth conversation. It can be a lot of fun. You can even do this with more than one person if you like. And when you find a partner you can work well with, it can be incredible. You can find potential collaborators through different social circles, going to jam nights, or even searching on places like Craigslist or Gumtree, although honestly that can be a little bit hit or miss. To recap though, you learned 5 ways of writing songs if you only play bass and not one of the more kind of traditional instruments like songwriters use, like the guitar or the piano. Method number 1 was starting with the melody and then putting some bass notes underneath it and then fleshing it out into full chords. Method number 2 was to start with the drum groove, so you're not starting from a completely blank slate. Method number 3 was using existing song structures like the blues to get the ball rolling. Method number 4 was all about using your knowledge of chords and music theory to write. And finally we talked about finding other people that you could write with and bounce ideas off. By the way, you don't have to use just one of these methods. They are totally compatible with each other, so you can use them all. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. Now if you've enjoyed this lesson, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and if this is your first Become a Bassist video, make sure and check out some of the other lessons on the channel as well. There's a ton of really cool stuff in there. I'm Luke from Become a Bassist, and I'll catch you in another video soon. Cheers.